In the next 3 seconds, you are about to hear a secret recorded conversation between Ilhan Omar and a foreign operative. But before that, if you think you have witnessed political takedowns before, think again, because you have seen nothing like this. Senator John Kennedy, armed with razor-sharp wit and an unbreakable devotion to truth, steps into the spotlight, and what unfolds over the next hour will alter American politics forever. This is not merely another hearing. It is the total ethical destruction of a politician who believed herself untouchable. What you are about to hear includes evidence so shocking and so damaging to integrity that it will force you to question everything you thought you knew about those in Congress. And listener discretion is advised. This is the account of how a Louisiana senator, carrying a briefcase filled with evidence, dismantled a controversial figure. A story of ethical justice. The Senate Ethics Committee hearing room crackled with anticipation as C-SPAN cameras broadcast live to millions of Americans, demanding accountability. Unaware they were about to witness what would become the most watched congressional hearing in history, eclipsing even Watergate in both viewership and moral weight. Kennedy entered with the confidence of a principled leader who had prepared for years, his worn leather briefcase holding proof of deep deception, while his plain suit, wire-rimmed glasses, and unmistakable Louisiana presence contrasted sharply with the explosive revelations to come. As Chairman Chuck Grassley called the room to order and announced an emergency oversight hearing into potential ethical violations and abuse of office, silence fell, and Kennedy calmly took his seat, placing the briefcase on the table as millions watched live. His preparation precise, his evidence crushing, and his commitment to ethics firm. Meanwhile, Representative Ilhan Omar entered through the rear doors, surrounded by a phalanx of costly attorneys whose grim faces revealed concern, her forced confidence failing to hide the unease in her eyes and the slight tremor in her hands as she grasped the scope of Kennedy's readiness. The progressive firebrand, known for bold rhetoric and radical stances, now faced a senator famed for sharp wit, homespun wisdom, and relentless truth-seeking. And as Grassley noted with quiet satisfaction how fitting it was that she attended, he invited Kennedy to begin. Locking eyes with Omar, Kennedy made clear this was no routine session but a direct confrontation driven by undeniable facts. And as he began, his voice mixing Southern charm with prosecutorial steel, he declared that what he would present revealed systematic violations of ethical standards, immigration law, and public trust, pointing to misrepresentations and inconsistencies that would trouble any honest American. As the stage was set, Kennedy, the plain-spoken senator armed with compelling evidence, now stood opposite Omar, whose career was poised to be revealed as resting on questionable foundations. And the ethical reckoning was officially underway. For years, Kennedy's office had carried out one of the most exhaustive investigations into congressional integrity in the nation's history, assembling evidence so carefully documented that even Omar's strongest supporters would be forced to reconsider their positions. He had constructed an airtight case designed to challenge her narrative and underscore the necessity of transparency in public service. With folders prepared, witnesses lined up, and millions of Americans watching closely, hoping to see trust in accountable government restored. Because in America, no one, absolutely no one, stands above ethical standards. Kennedy opened his first folder with deliberate care, the sound of rustling papers slicing through the silence of the chamber, like the opening notes of an ethical symphony. The thick file stamped with official government seals carrying an ominous weight. Representative Omar, he began in a Louisiana drawl that carried across the room like honey over broken glass. Back home in Louisiana, we say if you're going to tell a story, your facts better be straight. And today, we'll see if your immigration story stands up to ethical scrutiny. Omar straightened in her chair, flanked by her attorneys like guards shielding someone under siege. and replied with forced confidence, her voice tinged with progressive certainty, welcoming questions about her immigration journey and insisting she had always been transparent about her story as a refugee who found safety and opportunity in America. Kennedy responded that this was mighty interesting, his eyes glinting with the anticipation of a principled investigator sensing tension on the factual line, because he had documents that might cast new light on that claimed transparency. Omar then launched into her well-rehearsed narrative, recounting fleeing Somalia, enduring refugee camps, and finding sanctuary in the United States, believing this familiar ground to be safe territory that allies had never challenged and expecting Kennedy to follow the same respectful script. She explained that her family fled Somalia's civil war when she was young, spent years in a Kenyan refugee camp, and were legally resettled in America, calling it a story of generosity and lawful opportunity. Gesturing broadly as she leaned into the role like a professor addressing slow students, praising America's ability to welcome those fleeing persecution and give them a chance to contribute, and declaring that her family's journey embodied American values. The audience nodded as immigration advocates exchanged knowing glances. Seeing the Ilhan Omar they expect a confident, articulate, and firmly in control of her narrative, delivering talking points with precision, while Kennedy remained silent, calmly scribbling notes on a legal pad. Asterisk, his patient Louisiana smile never wavered. And because he was unmoved by the performance, it became less convincing to everyone watching. "Well, Representative Omar, I appreciate that story," Kennedy said as he reached into his briefcase with deliberate slowness. "But I'm a straight shooter, and straight shooters rely on documents." He explained that what he held came from the Department of Homeland Security, the State Department, and Immigration Services official government records, not campaign talking points. Omar's smile faltered as Kennedy methodically arranged the papers. She questioned what he was implying and stated her immigration records were public, prompting Kennedy, his charm sharpening, to ask if they truly were, because the documents revealed some striking discrepancies. Holding up a refugee application from the mid-1990s on the chamber monitors, he highlighted dates with a laser pointer, noting that her family claimed to flee Somalia in one year while her autobiography and interviews cited another, a gap he called significant. As her attorneys whispered urgently, Kennedy continued, saying the real issue was what happened during those missing years, producing a document bearing Kenyan government seals and asking where she was on a specific day in 2009. Omar paled but maintained composure, saying she would need to check her records, calling it a long-ago date. But Kennedy gently pressed, explaining that the day was crucial to her immigration story. The monitors then displayed a Kenyan marriage certificate from 2009 listing Ilhan Omar and Ahmed Noor, said Elmi, complete with official stamps. And the chamber went silent as Kennedy explained she was married to Elmi. When Omar tried to interrupt, Kennedy raised a hand, saying the ethical implications were serious, and produced another document, an immigration petition for a spouse, noting that the certificate showed she was already married elsewhere, calling it bigamy. His tone sharpened as he referenced cultural traditions suggesting an earlier religious marriage, but emphasized the legal marriage in 2009. Omar reacted visibly as her attorneys scrambled, and Kennedy gestured toward the rear doors, explaining the matter was complex and required clarification. A distinguished elderly man in a conservative suit entered under escort, clearly a career immigration official. Kennedy introduced him as Mr. James Patterson, former director of refugee services who processed the Omar family case, completing Omar's shock. Patterson, thought to be quietly retired, was an unexpected witness, and questions swirled about how Kennedy located and persuaded him. Adjusting the microphone with trembling hands, Patterson spoke with steady authority drawn from 3 decades of experience, stating he needed to correct the record on the Omar family's immigration case. His testimony was devastating, citing false family relationships, inaccurate persecution claims, mismatched timelines, and an application expedited despite serious irregularities. Leaning forward, Kennedy asked if the family qualified for refugee status, to which Patterson firmly replied they did not and would normally have been denied. Kennedy then displayed a timeline chart comparing Omar's conflicting claims with official records, emphasizing that documents do not lie, listing differing versions of ages, family members, and persecutions. Omar's defense faltered as she called them minor discrepancies, but Kennedy responded with rising ethical indignation, stressing that misrepresenting information to the government is a serious federal offense with severe penalties, including deportation, and that, while she benefited, genuine refugees were denied. He then revealed DNA results, addressing her marriage to Ahmed Elmi, noting she called him a friend, while DNA identified him as her brother, causing audible gasps as Kennedy accused her of marrying her brother to circumvent immigration law, an offense against American law and decency. Omar clutched the table, breathing rapidly, calling it character assassination and claiming the DNA was fabricated. But Kennedy calmly replied that DNA is concerned only with truth, not background, and said her career was built on misrepresentation. The first round concluded with Kennedy having dismantled her narrative through documents, testimony, and science, and as he glanced at a second folder marked with Federal Election Commission seals, it was clear worse was still ahead, signaling the end of round one. Asterisk Representative Omar, he said with Louisiana charm. We've still got more ethical dancing to do, and as the recess was called, it felt endless for her as she sat hunched in a side room while her attorneys whispered urgently about damage control. Kennedy's evidence was far too precise and far too devastating to be accidental. He had not stumbled onto it, but had constructed an ethical case with prosecutorial precision. The 15-minute break stretched into an eternity for Ilhan Omar as she remained folded in her chair, surrounded by expensive lawyers clustered around her like physicians attending a terminal patient. The confidence that had sustained her through years of activism evaporating like morning dew under the Louisiana sun. Her lead attorney whispered that they needed to consider damage control options because Kennedy clearly had access to records they never knew existed. And although Omar hissed back that it was all political theater meant to silence a progressive voice and that she could handle some Louisiana senator with ethical fantasies, her voice lacked its usual fire. Deep down, she knew something fundamental had shifted. Because the immigration documents, the witness testimony, and the DNA evidence were too exact and too crushing to dismiss. Proof that Kennedy had been building this case methodically, like a straight shooter who always hits his mark. When the hearing reconvened, Kennedy sat calmly at the table with a new folder placed squarely in front of him, thicker than the first, and bound with Federal Election Commission seals that seemed to pulse with financial significance. And as Chairman Grassley announced that Senator Kennedy could continue with his ethical presentation, it was clear another unraveling was about to begin. Kennedy rose slowly, his movements deliberate and predatory, like a senator who had finally found the perfect test case for accountability, and thanked the chairman before turning directly to Representative Omar and saying it was time to talk about how she had been spending the American people's money. Omar straightened in her chair, trying to project confidence she no longer felt, insisting that she had always complied with FEC regulations and campaign finance laws and that her financial disclosures were public record. Kennedy smiled gently, almost grandfatherly, and replied that this was mighty interesting because he had records, suggesting her definition of compliance might differ from what ethical standards require. He opened the folder with ceremonial care, revealing stacks of bank records, FEC filings, and financial documents reminding her that when donor money and taxpayer resources are involved, transparency is not optional, but ethical. producing his first document and a simple calculator. Kennedy noted that Omar's congressional salary was $174,000 a year, while her husband's consulting firm had received roughly $2.8 million from her campaign and associated PACs over recent years, more than 16 times her annual salary flowing into her family's business. The chamber monitors displayed the figures, each transaction listed with dates, amounts, and purposes. As Kennedy remarked that while he was no mathematician, it looked like a convenient way to convert campaign contributions into family income. Omar responded quickly with a rehearsed defense, claiming her husband's firm provided legitimate consulting services such as travel coordination, fundraising assistance, and strategic communications necessary for a competitive campaign. Kennedy, his Louisiana drawl carrying new weight, replied that this was interesting because he had travel records that might cast new light on the kind of consulting being provided, producing a thick stack of travel receipts and expense reports stamped and signed. He pointed out that during certain periods, her campaign paid her husband's firm $230,000 for travel consulting. Yet the receipts revealed something curious. Displayed side by side on the monitors, the campaign expense reports showed payments for official travel, while the actual receipts told a different story altogether, listing luxury resorts in Bermuda, first-class flights to Paris, and five-star hotels in Rome. Reading the details with devastating precision, Kennedy said that as a simple Louisiana senator, he struggled to understand how a vacation in Bermuda qualified as campaign travel for a Minnesota congresswoman. Omar's panic became visible as her hands trembled while shuffling through prepared responses, insisting those trips were legitimate campaign strategy sessions requiring private settings for sensitive discussions, prompting Kennedy to raise his eyebrows with theatrical skepticism and repeat, "Strategy sessions in Bermuda for a Minnesota congressional race." Asterisk, he pulled out another document, remarking that it was curious how a hotel receipt from the Fairmont Southampton showed she checked in as Mr. and Mrs. for a 7-day stay with the same husband whose consulting firm received $230,000 from her campaign and who was married to another woman at the time. The implications lingering in the room like an ethical thundercloud. Kennedy was not finished and gestured to his staff, who rolled in a sophisticated timeline display illustrating the overlap between Omar's personal relationship and her campaign payments. Standing beside it, Kennedy said they needed to talk about timing, pointing out that the chart revealed something striking about when her husband's payments began and when their personal relationship started. The timeline was devastating, showing the end of Omar's previous marriage, the beginning of payments to the consulting firm shortly afterward, and the later public emergence of their romantic relationship. According to the timeline, Kennedy explained, she began paying her current husband's consulting firm months before finalizing her divorce from her previous husband, effectively using campaign money to fund an affair. When Omar tried to interrupt, Kennedy raised his hand and said that was not even the most interesting part, because the real issue was what her husband was doing with that money while still married to his first wife. He then displayed divorce court documents from the husband's first marriage, explaining that these filings showed, according to his ex-wife's attorney, that he left his wife and children to pursue a romantic relationship with Ilhan Omar, a relationship allegedly funded by campaign contributions. Details that landed with devastating force. The ex-wife's sworn testimony detailed discovering receipts for romantic getaways charged to Omar's campaign, finding love letters, and learning their marriage ended because he was in love with a congresswoman who was paying him millions. Kennedy then reached for a secure recording device on the table and said that while Omar claimed all the payments were for legitimate consulting services, he had something that might clarify what services her husband was truly providing. The large monitors flickered on to a split screen, with a bank transaction record on the left showing a $50,000 transfer from Omar's campaign to the consulting firm and a timestamp on the right marking the exact same moment. Kennedy explained that the bank record showed a $50,000 payment to her husband's firm at 2:47 p.m., and he asked everyone to watch what happened 37 minutes later. The right side then displayed hotel booking confirmations for a luxury Miami resort paid for with a credit card linked to the firm. Kennedy observed with prosecutorial precision that the campaign paid for consulting at 2:47 p.m., and the husband booked a romantic weekend getaway at 3:24 p.m. the same day, stating plainly that this was not consulting but personal enrichment with extra steps. The hearing room erupted as Omar's remaining composure finally collapsed, and she protested that this was a violation of privacy and demanded to know how private bank records were obtained. Kennedy replied calmly that when campaign money is used for personal expenses, bank records become evidence of ethical breaches. Then opened his final folder for the round marked with official Federal Election Commission seals and criminal referral stamps. Addressing her directly, Kennedy's voice took on the tone of a senator delivering a lesson in accountability, as he said he would explain what she had done in terms the American people could understand. Writing on a whiteboard campaign finance violations, personal use of campaign funds, filing false reports, wire fraud, tax evasion, and conspiracy to defraud the United States. Each charge was written clearly with statute numbers and penalty ranges. And Kennedy stated that these amounted to 6 federal felonies, each carrying potential sentences of 5 to 20 years in federal prison. Turning back to her, he said what truly troubled him was that while she used campaign money to fund romantic getaways, legitimate candidates across America could not afford to run for office because they followed the rules. His voice rising with ethical indignation as he said she stole from her own supporters, people who donated $5 and $10 believing they were backing causes, only for their money to be spent on luxury vacations. With Mar's response came out desperate and scattered, insisting the allegations were baseless, that her campaign had always followed regulations, and that the entire proceeding was a partisan witch hunt meant to silence strong voices. Kennedy replied swiftly and forcefully, stating that ethics authorities do not care about politics, but about the law, and that, according to the law, the violations presented were serious enough to keep someone explaining themselves in court for decades. He then introduced one final document for this round, marked with Treasury-style seals and offshore banking indicators, and said there was still one more issue to address, noting that the campaign violations were only the surface of a much larger ethical problem. The monitors displayed intricate financial flowcharts showing money moving through layered accounts and shell entities, outlining a network of trusts and offshore structures that had received millions in questionable payments over several years from sources that would concern any patriotic citizen. The financial web appeared vast, showing transfers routed through foreign organizations and overseas banking havens before landing in accounts controlled by immediate family members. Kennedy concluded with finality that this was not merely campaign finance misconduct, but the transformation of public office into a personal financial machine, funded by hostile interests. The second round ended with Kennedy having systematically exposed fictional financial corruption through records, violations, and an alleged conspiracy extending far beyond simple abuse. And as he reached for a third folder, marked with intelligence-style seals and foreign registration documents, his expression made clear that the financial narrative was only the groundwork for a far more dangerous storyline tied to national security, signaling that round 2 was complete. "Representative Omar," he said, with that chilling Louisiana calm, "now we need to talk about who's been paying you to undermine America and why they believe you're worth the investment." And as the chamber erupted with shocked murmurs and frantic note-taking, Omar sat frozen in her chair, realizing her financial misconduct had just been framed as part of a much broader pattern of unethical behavior. The Louisiana senator was carefully constructing a case that threatened to shift the hearing from a political scandal into something resembling a national security crisis. And if Omar believed the financial revelations were devastating, she was about to discover that John Kennedy was only beginning. The room continued buzzing with disbelief as Omar remained motionless, grasping that her financial actions were tied to a larger ethical pattern, while the senator methodically transformed the proceeding into a national security matter. Reaching for his third folder, the straight-talking senator revealed one marked with intelligence-style seals and foreign agent registration documents that seemed to pulse with ominous significance. Addressing Omar with renewed gravity, Kennedy said that if she thought unethical conduct was limited to campaign money, she was about to learn who had allegedly been paying her to weaken America from within. Her remaining attorneys whispered frantic damage control strategies, but she appeared unable to hear them. Her gaze locked on Kennedy with the intensity of someone witnessing her own political downfall. Kennedy rose and moved to a presentation easel set up during the break and announced that it was time to discuss her pattern of statements regarding Jewish Americans and the State of Israel, displaying a timeline of her most controversial remarks, each carefully documented with dates, locations, and context, forming a pattern that appeared undeniable and deeply troubling, culminating with the quoted statement, "It's all about the Benjamins." Another reference to allegiance toward a foreign country appeared as the timeline continued, rolling forward with quote after quote, each one more inflammatory than the last, including statements equating actions of the United States, Hamas, the Taliban, and Israel. Kennedy turned to face Omar directly and said this was not an occasional poor choice of words, but a consistent pattern of rhetoric that raised serious ethical questions about where her loyalties lay. Omar responded quickly but weakly, insisting her words had been taken out of context, claiming she opposed hate in all forms and that her criticism targeted policies, not people. Kennedy pressed back, asking if that was truly the case as he introduced another document, explaining that he had testimony from community leaders suggesting a different reality. He gestured toward the gallery and said the American people deserved to hear directly from those affected by her rhetoric. The first witness was Rabbi David Goldstein, a Holocaust survivor whose presence alone commanded deep respect, and despite his advanced age, he approached the witness table with dignity and moral authority. Introducing himself, he explained that he survived Auschwitz, came to America with nothing, and helped build communities in Minnesota, her district. His testimony carried heavy emotional weight as he said that when politicians speak of Jews buying influence with money, he hears the same lies used to justify the murder of his family, and when Israel is compared to terrorists, his grandchildren are told their people are no better than those who seek their destruction. His voice cracked as he said he believed he had escaped such hatred in America and never imagined hearing it from a congresswoman meant to represent his own community. As Kennedy listened with a tone that remained respectful, yet firm, Kennedy asked Rabbi Goldstein directly whether Representative Omar's statements constituted harmful rhetoric. And without hesitation, the rabbi replied that they did, saying it was the same kind of language he heard in 1930s Germany. Lies and hatred wrapped in sophisticated words. Kennedy then returned to his evidence table and produced a folder marked with Treasury and Foreign Agent Registration Act seals, telling Representative Omar it was time to discuss her relationship with the Council on American-Islamic Relations. CARE. Omar's confidence briefly returned as she described CARE as a civil rights organization defending Muslim Americans and said she was proud of her association. But Kennedy replied that this was interesting because financial records suggested CARE was not exactly what it claimed to be. The monitors displayed complex flowcharts showing money moving from foreign sources through intermediaries to CARE, and then into accounts connected to Omar. And according to Treasury-style records, CARE had received more than $12 million from sources in Qatar. Turkey, and others that viewed America as a rival. Kennedy highlighted specific transactions, noting that 3 days after the Benjamins' comment, CARE transferred $50,000 to Omar's legal fund, a timing he described as damning. He said controversial statements were followed by criticism and then by money from an organization funded by foreign governments opposed to Israel, calling it foreign influence peddling rather than civil rights work. Kennedy then reached for his most sensitive folder, marked with intelligence-style classifications, and said CARE was merely a middleman, turning the focus to who was truly funding the activities. The monitors displayed satellite-style imagery of a Doha compound alongside financial records tracing transfers into U.S. organizations, identifying the Qatar Foundation as a front for influence operations, with linked groups allegedly funneling millions to entities paying Omar's campaign and family accounts. Kennedy's voice sharpened as he concluded that she had accepted money from a government portrayed as hosting and funding hostile groups and viewing U.S. support for Israel as an obstacle. Omar denied the accusations desperately, calling them conspiracy theories and insisting she had never received foreign money directly, to which Kennedy calmly agreed, saying she had used intermediaries, but that doing so did not make it ethical or legal. He then activated a secure recording device and stated that his office had obtained a phone conversation between her and an individual of interest, prompting Omar's eyes to widen as she objected that intercepting her communications was illegal, only for Kennedy to reply evenly that coordination with foreign agents on unsecured lines constituted evidence. As he pressed play, Omar's recorded voice filled the chamber, referencing a hearing that had gone as planned and concerns about Kennedy asking too many questions, followed by a male voice with a Middle Eastern accent assuring her that her work was valued and that additional funding would be transferred through the usual channels, after which Omar instructed that it go through an intermediary to avoid direct connections. The recording carried devastating implications, suggesting coordination on payments and political activity. And Kennedy followed by presenting an analysis of Omar's voting record in relation to Middle Eastern government positions, stating that in dozens of votes concerning Israel and terrorism, her positions aligned consistently with those of Qatar. His voice rose as he declared that she had not represented her state, but rather foreign interests within Congress. Omar's response unraveled into incoherent claims of bias and religious targeting. But Kennedy countered sharply that the issue was not faith, but loyalty, asserting that the evidence showed allegiance to foreign governments hostile to America. He then gestured to additional witnesses, including a former staffer who testified that she joined Omar's office believing in inclusion, but later witnessed coordination with foreign organizations unrelated to American civil rights, including calls from foreign voices directing votes, followed by a former CARE official who claimed Omar assisted foreign governments in recruiting American Muslims for influence operations, turning communities into strategic assets. Kennedy rose for his final presentation and declared that what had been documented went far beyond questionable associations, describing a systematic pattern of foreign influence aimed at undermining U.S. policy, alleging acceptance of foreign funds, coordination with outside agents, voting aligned with foreign direction, and misuse of public office to support external operations. His voice built to a crescendo as he said these actions violated an oath and betrayed the trust of the American people, bringing the third round to a close with records, recordings, and testimony portraying a sweeping anti-American conspiracy within the fictional narrative. As he reached for a fourth folder marked with Department of Defense-style seals, his expressions suggested that the alleged foreign ties were only preparation for something even more severe. Declaring round 3 complete, Kennedy addressed Representative Omar again with measured Louisiana calm and said it was now time to discuss what had been done with America's trusted access and sensitive information, framing it as betrayal. The chamber descended into chaos, yet Omar remained motionless, Her once forceful demeanor fractured under the cumulative weight of the accusations. As the Louisiana senator transformed the hearing into a tribunal of ethical justice, still not finished, John Kennedy reached for his final folder marked with defense-style seals and classifications. So serious that even security personnel appeared unsettled. Representative Omar Kennedy began, his voice heavy with the authority of a senator guarding the nation's trust. Everything we've discussed so far, migration, misconduct, financial corruption, foreign influence, was merely preparation. Because now we must address your oath of office and the betrayal of the American people who place their trust in you. Holding up a worn copy of the Constitution, Kennedy asked if she recalled the oath she swore as a congresswoman, and Omar replied faintly that she had taken the standard oath. Standard, Kennedy repeated in his Louisiana drawl, lending the word solemn weight, before reciting the pledge to support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic, emphasizing that it was a promise to the American people, not to outside powers. He then opened his folder to display documents marked with House Intelligence, committee-style seals, and stated that, as a member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, she had access to sensitive national security information. Omar attempted to steady herself, insisting her service had always respected classified protocols. But Kennedy's tone sharpened as he said he had evidence suggesting she shared classified material with unauthorized foreign contacts. The monitors displayed phone records showing calls placed after classified briefings to numbers linked to foreign intelligence, with Kennedy noting precisely that 14 such calls were made within hours of briefings. More troubling, he said, was the content of those communications, as transcripts portrayed the sharing of sensitive details involving military positioning, diplomatic strategies, and warnings about operations targeting hostile proxies. And as the implications sank in, Omar's visible panic intensified. Omar protested that the transcripts were fabricated, and that surveilling a congresswoman was illegal. But Kennedy replied that when a congresswoman betrays her country, surveillance becomes evidence. He activated the video system and reminded her she had testified under oath, then displayed a split screen showing her sworn denials alongside recordings that contradicted them. Coordinating with foreign agents, the side-by-side comparison exposing lie after lie. Calling perjury a felony, Kennedy stated she had committed it at least 17 times. Then presented emails revealing her use of congressional resources to share legislative priorities with foreign officials, directly undermining U.S. interests and turning her office into a foreign influence hub funded by taxpayers she had betrayed. His tone grew grave as he said what followed was classified at the highest levels, but that the American people deserved to know. Explaining that on a specific date she attended a briefing on U.S. operations against Iranian nuclear facilities, and that within hours, Qatari sources relayed those details to Iranian commanders. The timeline was devastating: the briefing, her call, then hostile forces acting on the information, showing she had not merely leaked information but enabled enemies to counter American operations. Via secure video, a shadowed CIA officer testified that Omar's leaks compromised 12 operations, leading to the capture and likely execution of 3 U.S. assets. Saying American blood was on her hands, Kennedy accused her of selling out those who protect the homeland, holding the Constitution and an American flag from fallen service members' families, as he declared she had sworn to defend the Constitution, but instead became the enemy the founders feared. A domestic threat serving foreign masters who took their money, followed their orders, and leaked secrets that cost American lives. Federal marshals entered with arrest warrants, announcing she was under arrest for espionage and conspiracy as she collapsed and paramedics rushed in. After which Kennedy addressed the chamber, stating this was ethical justice and that no one is above the Constitution. The room erupted in applause, underscoring his defense of American values. As the lesson of the hearing rang clear, accountability is the bedrock of democracy. No official is above the law. Loyalty to country must outweigh personal gain or foreign influence. Ethical leadership requires the courage to confront betrayal. Citizens must remain vigilant in demanding transparency and integrity. And though justice may be slow, with principled leadership, it prevails, ensuring the Constitution endures as a shield against those who would undermine it.